has it been since we've done this? 4 years? 5 years?
Yeah, I guess.
4
I mean, well,
years.
we've done a couple little, little videos, but we haven't actually done any podcasts.
Right.
It's been a while. And with that,
Hey, everybody.
so we thought we would have these chats because we always get stuck in the kitchen or wherever rambling on about training and things, and we figured, that's kind of what generally constitutes a podcast these days. So we might as well record it and stick it up someplace for people that are interested in listening to people ramble on about training.
Yep. This will be very informal.
Yeah.
And it's something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. We did it back in California. So
Yeah.
it's been like 4 years, maybe longer. But
We don't know what to call it, like Kitchen Confidential or Strange and Stranger or something.
oh, I like that. I'll let you handle the name. I like that.
So yeah, we're just testing out the waters. So hopefully, we can do this on a semi-consistent basis. Don't hope for too much, maybe monthly, since it's really hard to get.
Probably monthly. We're going to keep them short too. We'll probably start with like a 25 or maybe 30 minutes. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. But
Yeah.
if you have any suggestions or you want to like put some topics up there, feel free to leave some comments on there because this is going to go up on YouTube and then we can kind of tweak it from there. But
Yeah,
totally
or we might just start picking some questions out of our Instagram messages. That's where I kind of came up with the topic of progress today. It's kind of a general, like,
it's a broad topic.
Super broad topic, which is going to be really funny to try to do in a short format.
We could talk about some thoughts on it,
So I guess, like, I'll just jump right in. So progress is always something, people are like, I'm not seeing progress in something, and so lately my main response, especially because what we do kind of encompasses all things, and so your body's adapting to whatever you're doing in your life. But when it comes to training, you have different kind of directions that you can ask your body to adapt, and people are pretty familiar with the difference between things that are simple like conditioning and strength training. One's anabolic and one's catabolic, and to a degree you can kind of see them both progress together for a pretty long ways. And then you look at people like CrossFit athletes and it gets really confusing that they do work against each other. So like, for example, a marathon runner, to be the best that they could be at running a marathon, can't be the strongest man in the world. Like so you have to look at kind of like the far end examples to kind of really understand that divergence. And like the very best CrossFit athlete is not going to beat the, world record marathon time if they're still doing CrossFit. They'd have to stop doing that stuff to get into that like hyper efficiency zone. So when you're doing training like what we do, which is a lot of that capsule specific stuff, because we mostly find that, we had, and everybody in general doing regular strength training has been neglecting the deeper tissues underneath the big muscles. So like, we don't train the rotational muscles around the joint. We don't train the capsule. So typically you go into somebody's capsule, and unless they just genetically have good space, there won't be space, especially if they've been working to tighten with strength training. So when you go in and you say, oh, well, I have to do a space creation input, we call these now. When you ask for more space, that's a specific type of adaptation, and it's the opposite of tighten. So you have to kind of, organize your program in that way. And if you think you have put a lot of frequency on the space creation, but you're still not seeing the results, it could be like a really stubborn area. Like I feel like ankle dorsiflexion, shoulder external rotation, like there are certain just kind of hard, feels like you're just really on a hard limit there. But things like adding weighted eccentrics, like high intensity eccentrics, because again, that demand is a strength training demand, but it's also a lengthening demand, asking for tissue to be laid down at length. I want more stuff, build me more stuff here. Taking it beyond just you're getting good at your passive stretching and your pails and rails, but then also looking at like, what else are you doing in that program that's tightening up your shoulder? And maybe it isn't a lot. Maybe you do have a lot of frequency on the stretching and you're going to throw in those eccentrics, but you're still doing stuff that is tightening up the front of that shoulder capsule. So when you do just go in and stretch everything, like afterwards, like stretch the external rotation, stretch the linear tissues out, like don't give it any opportunity to continue to steal space. Just make sure that whatever adaptations are happening, that it's being followed up by, but maintain my space, please.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard because there's so many levels on the spectrum of training that can be the hurdles to get over, like that can limit progress, right? Like I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we've learned, like using FRC and having a good chunk of time now to train lots of people using that is like, I mean, talking about Instagram and people asking questions, I have people who reach out and they're like, my shoulder hurts when I do these exercises and I'm having trouble getting that shoulder stronger. So, I mean, it could be lots of different stuff, but I think like kind of getting in your head the order of importance as far as, you know, like a hierarchy of strength and performance goes is like the very first thing that you need is capsule space. You've got bone needs room to move around, and you need to have control over that room, and ideally there's some strength through that room of the bone to move around. So if that's the lacking part, then that's really like you need to figure out how to train that and make it better. And you know, like it takes time and training and effort. Some people do better with daily inputs on it. Some people do better with a couple days a week. There's a little bit of figuring out there to find like what's the magic number. So once we check off that little box, then we can go on to the next thing. That might be, you know, is there enough connective tissue in there to tolerate the load that you want to do, enough to distribute the load that you're putting into it? Because if that isn't there, you could be lifting and doing stuff that would normally make it strong, but if the connective tissue is maxed out, like even looking at eccentrics, all these things can be done at too much intensity. So finding the right intensity to get that stuff to adapt. If the connective tissue's there, cool. Then we have those two probably biggest hurdles covered, and now there's a lot more options for doing, I don't know, whatever you want to do with your shoulder. You want to make it strong, you want to make it fast. We can train those things. Yeah, I think that's probably like, that's always the magic equation of things that we help people with, though, is just figuring out that, like, what's the starting point? What's the first thing that's lacking? Maybe you don't have connective tissue and joint space. Well, we don't worry about the connective tissue yet. Let's worry about getting the joint space in, at least as the overall focus. Maybe some maintenance work on connective tissue or something, but
also too, like just the it's a delicate line to ride with intensity drives adaptation, you know, at that kind of end point. Like the ultimate simple statement is intensity and failure, and that, you know, shorter time frames, those kind of drive those adaptations. But like if you throw intensity at tissue that's not ready for that intensity, it's not going to make it better. You know, and it might be minuscule enough that it's not injuring it really, but it's also just enough that it's not progressing. And there's a weird zone that people kind of get stuck in sometimes, and something that we've really learned just through practicing, and you really got into it, noticed it first, like not working in your deepest end range if you have closing angle sensation, that being a big one, you know, like, because it seems like it's not that big of a deal, like it's not painful, but there might be just even some sensation or pinch where it shouldn't be there, and then moving just inside of where that sensation pops up and doing your work there can be huge. And one thing that we noticed too is, like, if you get in there, you do your stuff, you do some pails, and you feel like, oh, I've really opened, it responded positively, that's a sign that that's something that if you do with regularity, you're going to see progress, and that you can progress that intensity as long as you're continuing to see progress from it. But if you work too hard, it doesn't progress. Like, it just goes, ooh, you know, fuck you, and it takes it back, and it freaks out and tightens up, and it's just kind of perpetuating this cycle where you like pull the little tensegrity thing, like you just snap it too much, and it just goes back to freaking out.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hardest component of this training is the level of nuance that you got to pay attention to. Like, you know, like if you have a shitty shoulder, and when I say shitty shoulder, that's general, but it could be, let's say you have a shoulder that just has very little room for rotation. And considering that that rotation is how your brain understands like how that joint is moving and where it is in space and all the things that you're wanting it to do, if you have a limited capacity there, and then you take that joint and you put it all the way into its very end of whatever capacity it has, which is already limited, and then ask it to work really hard, it's just like, what the fuck? I don't know what to do here. And the intensity thing is tricky too, because like if you're working in a position that already is limited by how much force it can develop and understanding from your brain's perspective and all that stuff, like a little bit of effort there is possibly a very high amount of load for that tissue to experience, because it just doesn't do a lot. So sometimes it's just a matter of like, we're used to things that feel hard in various forms of training, but what the tissue might be experiencing in that end range is like an 11 out of 10, even though it only feels like you're pushing it with a little bit of force, because that's normal, right? If it has very low capacity there, it's easy to overload that. So yeah, reducing range of motion, and really like just, we got to feel the tissue that we're trying to train. If you're trying to train the external rotators of your shoulder in the lengthened position and you don't feel shit happening in that area, it's a good indication that you're not actually training the tissue that you want to train. So that's probably, I think, been one of the biggest things to like figure out and really develop and help people understand when we're training them, is like learning where they need to feel stuff and what that feels like. And like Sarah said, right, when you do it, it's not like, rarely is it like it's magically just gone. Sometimes that happens and we get lucky, and it's something that needed very minimal training in that one specific angle. But if you do it at the right level and the right intensity, it always makes it feel a little bit better afterwards. And that's such an important piece to go off of, because if it feels a tiny bit worse after you do it, your body's telling you at some level that wasn't the right thing to do. It was the wrong intensity, the wrong position, whatever. And that's like the make or break it with this shit. Because if I mean, I have people who are like, I've been training internal rotation for 2 months and my shoulder feels exactly the same and it's not any better. And they're like, I don't think I need to train this. I would, if I had never worked with them before, I'll always have them go through internal rotation training and show me what they've been doing. And I'll ask them a shitload of questions about where they're feeling it and how hard they're pushing. And a lot of the time it is just a little too deep, a little too hard. There's, we could spend an hour, we could spend weeks talking about this probably.
Yeah. The nervous system is a weird thing. Like I have a lot of range, and so for me to work in my end range, I can work in really far ranges, but sometimes those don't feel great, or I'll experience some odd feelings on the way to that range. So I'm like the too flexible person that has a different experience with that stuff. But again, like, oh, this shoulder was feeling funky, and I just noticed, I'm like, oh, that's strange, but again, if I regress it and do the work, and then I can move past it. Anyways, yeah, so there's that kind of progress. Yeah. So I hope that makes sense, as far as like, there's certain things that you basically need to keep in mind. Keep in mind the other inputs in the training program, and that, I'm asking for more space. What are the things that I'm doing that are asking for more space? Am I doing enough of them? If this one thing isn't working, why isn't it working? Is it working because I'm not working because I'm just going too deep? Or is it because I've been doing the same fucking thing for too long and your body needs something else to do? Like, it needs more input, it wants to know something else, like it needs something novel at a point. You have to start to progress your training. And so adding those eccentrics, hovers, like just different activities in those end ranges that train that range, but then also trying to make sure that the stuff that you do that steals that range is you're going to stretch it all back out again. Like if you're going to train your quads really hard and they're going to get really, really tight, it's going to affect this stuff, and you have to understand that it's going to go, and you need to deal with these things.
Yeah, I mean, we, in this mindset of using the internal strength model and that approach to training, like, all training takes energy, and everything that your body has to do takes energy. So it's, you want to start thinking about where the energy is going. Like Sarah's saying, like the tightening stimulus of stuff. If all of the stimulus is going into shortening your muscle, and that's the majority of the shit that your body has to deal with from a training perspective, there's a lot of stuff that it's going to have to not put energy towards to make changes to, right? There's just like, it's just getting information on like muscle training, that's all that's going to get trained. But it is, if it's always shortening the muscle's just going to get tighter and shorter over time. So it's good just to think about like, where is the problem in your body? What's the thing that's lacking? It's worth considering too that all of the stuff that our body does from a training perspective, like there's all these internal things that have to work. And if something internally is lacking, you can change all of these variables externally, like squatting to different depth. You can change those exercises, but it's not dealing with the internal constraint. And that's the biggest part of this training, is like constantly trying to look at and improve all of these internal components of how the tissue and the joint functions, because that's usually going to be the limiting factor in really making progress. I mean, you have to typically, like, for the just, saying like my back isn't strong enough, or, I need to get my squat numbers up, like at some point for everybody, just doing more of those exercises like that isn't going to change the fact that your back isn't going to get any stronger from that, or your squat's not going to get stronger. It's usually something else going on in there that needs to be brought up.
Yeah. Yep. And then I guess, another kind of aspect of progress to think about too is just like progress as far as like strength and hypertrophy goes. And that's been a big thing with this program for people, is that it's different. The volume's a lot lower. In some ways it's lower, but there's also like you're training so much more
stuff,
tissue, like rather than just kind of hammering away 20 sets a week on your quads, you're doing a couple things for your quads, but then you're also training, your knee tissue, your hip tissue, the rotational tissues, like all those layers, connective tissue.
Yeah.
Tissue.
Yeah, I mean, it is like, it's work. Like you're, training for an hour, and maybe 75% of that hour was allocated towards training of the deeper tissue of the knee and the hip. And then the other 25% was doing actual muscular work. And depending on where you're trying to make adaptations, like if you do the muscular work and that's everything else is working, you're trying to do the muscular work at a high intensity to failure, it's hard, but it takes way less reps to do that. And it fucks with your head. Mm-hmm. It's weird. But, anecdotally, like we have a lot of people on our program now, and we've been doing this training for a long time. For me, it's been the most minimal volume I've ever done. And to see hypertrophy from that is crazy. Like all the years I've been training, it definitely
you're seeing more hypertrophy, than what you were.
Yeah, like it's been a year of training this way. And so this, and 39 years of living and training since my early teens, yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest year of hypertrophy, with like 3 or 4 days a week of training at low volume, one set of stuff, typically on a muscle group.
But there's, like we've just been kind of talking about, like, what are the things that kind of affect people in this space, and like intensity is one of them. And a lot of people have a really hard time figuring out how to produce intensity like is required to go to failure within a short time frame. And more than I would have thought. Like it's kind of surprising, because people that have been training for a really long time are so afraid of hurting themselves and like breaking form, like, oh, if I go too heavy, then I'm not going to be able to maintain good form and I'm going to get hurt. So I'm just not going to do that. And they're stuck in this zone of like feeling like they're doing hard work on a weight that's like, they just can't fail with that weight. And I've seen it a couple of times, and it's kind of always shocking to me. I don't have a problem finding intensity on most things. But then sometimes it's like the movements that you might be using aren't going to work. Like trying to do only compound movements for your training, there's benefits to compound movements for sure. And, we used to kind of be in that camp where it was like, just do compound movements, fuck bicep curls. Those are for idiots, like this whole thing. We were also in the old, don't round your back camp. So, live and learn.
That's right.
There's no spoon. But I guess, what I'm trying to really say here is just that you can change your mind about things. But in compound movements, so much stuff has to happen, has to work together, that if there are any weak links along the chain or weaker links along the chain, it limits the ability of another area of your body to perform. And I think that just like mentally and neurologically too, like being able to focus on one small thing and contract that and like work that area to move versus like trying to get your whole body organized in this nightmare of tension is different.
Yeah. I mean, and again, like it just, it's like who's the person that we're working with? What does this person need to do? Like at some point, there's no reason you can't just do squats to failure, or heavy ass squats to failure when you get everything working to the level that it should be to do those things.
Yeah.
But even then, just for like, it is really humbling if you've never tried to push yourself to that level of work. Like you'll probably be surprised that it's a lot of what you thought was failure was really just making a decision. Yeah, it's like, this fucking sucks. I don't want to feel this anymore. I'm gonna stop now. Like, I still have year after year, I still find things where I'm like, I could go to failure, but I don't think I can today. Like mentally, I'm not gonna do it. It's too hard.
Yeah, and that's so many things to talk about. So like, John Quint had a really good post with a beginner client doing a bench press, kind of saying that like, this wouldn't be a good movement to use for absolute strength for this person because so much of their ability is going to be focused on how to keep the barbell balanced and moving in the right path. So, as you're learning and as you've joined, maybe you're in our program and there's some things in there that are difficult for you to go to failure on, like the dumbbell front squat that was in there this past week. Like that's a hard thing for a lot of people to go to failure on just because it's so miserable to hold those stupid dumbbells on your shoulders, like it's just, that's maybe that factor is what is so hard about that for people. So just kind of playing around though with like the simpler movements, the things that feel safe, the things that you're ready to go to failure on, start going to failure. Obviously not with injuries, obviously not like, again, if you just don't understand a movement or you haven't been doing it for long enough to know that like my back is not going to like this. So there's certain things, reasons that you shouldn't go to failure, but you should try to go to failure because it does guarantee that you are working with the right intensity that's going to get you those progress, get you the results,
Yeah, and it's good to remind yourself too that there's lots of ways to create intensity that isn't just adding more load, right? Like that's one way to add intensity, and that is probably one of the hardest just from the standpoint of like it puts the most demand on all the parts really working well. But if you have some part, maybe your back just doesn't like really heavy ass squats, there's ways where you can make the other muscles get really, really fatigued. Like you can slow the tempo down, you can do more reps, you can go longer and just kind of feel out like, what does it actually take to get my quads to failure with lightweight? Like maybe it wasn't 60 seconds like that what we were calling for hypertrophy, but maybe you go for 2 minutes and you get slow twitch fiber training instead. All of it's loading and it's good learning experience, and it's good to just figure out what those options are too for intensity, because intensity is something that you can really create tons of ways without just putting more weight on the bar.
And we're trying to talk optimization here. Like there's many ways to skin the cat, all different kinds of programs and people out there, and just going and training and being consistent is the best as far as progress goes. And then not injuring yourself. I guess those two go together because injury doesn't allow consistency. So you need joint health and taking care of your joints to have that consistency. But the consistency is huge. But if you're not seeing progress, a lot of the time it's like, well, look at the intensity. Like, is the intensity enough? So if you're going to pull the volume out of a program, but you're not going to get the intensity where it needs to be, then the progress is probably going to go the wrong direction. I think that intensity is a really important piece,
Big time.
which is what's allowing for that limited volume. Otherwise, you do probably need to do a few more sets on that muscle group to just accumulate that. The main driver of adaptation is mechanical stress. There's a couple of other. There's a little bit of the metabolic and a little bit of the muscle damage, but they're like not quite 100% sure, yes or no, but there's something there as an interplay, but it's definitely mechanical stress for sure needs to happen, which happens through intensity. And then you're sending that signal to either get stronger or just produce more, a fiber type, depending on time and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
intensity, make sure the intensity's there. But then also there are some other folks that it's too intense, it's too much. You know, like if you're new to a program, you don't need to do everything. You need to do very little to see results. And sometimes doing too much is going to work against you. And then another thing that's kind of fun is that if you really don't have a lot of time, you really don't need all that much time with the ISM to see progress. Like that's the thing that we were kind of like, I don't know how this is going to work. Like when we went to the seminar and they told us like how, you know, basically like wait till you're recovered to really go again. You don't need to go within that. And we're like, really? Are you sure?
Yeah, well, you get used to, trying to
So
hit
much
heavy
stuff.
spots every week for so many years, and that just becomes the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. The goal would be, if we want adaptation, we need recovery for that to happen. So you want to let the recovery process happen to its fullest extent before you go
Yeah.
smash that stuff again. And obviously that's going to be different for people's age and recovery level and nutrition and sleep and all that shit.
Yeah. But we have like the opposite, totally opposite ends of the spectrum from the internal strength model programming. Like Grayson works out every day. He likes to keep all the balls up in the air. You know, I think it's like your old CrossFit upbringings, but
Probably.
he doesn't like to get bad at things, like take breaks on stuff. So there's conditioning in there, there's jumping, there's, weightlifting, there's strongman, there's all kinds of whatever.
I do a lot, but I do it in pretty low amount of time. I have like
His joint health stuff. I mean, he's very diligent.
Yeah, I'm obsessive about that shit, but that's just,
Whereas I'm like the minimal effective dose lady. Like I don't have any super lofty goals for my anything right now. Like I'm not trying to be ultra strong. I'm not trying to be ultra jacked. I'm not trying to be ultra lean. I'm just trying to like generally feel good, look good, be strongish, sort of, capable, kinda. I get totally embarrassed by my husband. But I hardly train. Like I really do. I train probably twice a week. Like I maybe do like a lower and upper. I try to do zone 2, which I don't do as much of as I should. I'm going to do some today.
Good job.
But like what I do have to say about that is it's fucking phenomenal how little I have to train and I'm still progressing and seeing results, and you could maybe argue like, well, but you did get detrained with having kids and all that stuff. But I mean, I hammered up through Bonnie like as far as I could. I was really trying my best to stay as in shape as I could. And you just, we have a kid, you can't just keep going. And then there was the pandemic and all that crap, and then we moved. So in some ways I did get detrained, and so there's that potential, like, is it new? I don't know. But it's amazing to me how little...
Well, yeah, totally.
Like, basically what I'm doing, according to what the research says, I shouldn't be progressing. I shouldn't be continuing to build muscle. I should be losing, is what would be said. Because you're supposed to do something at least once every 2 weeks to maintain. And, like, optimal for maintenance, they're saying, is, like, 4 sets a week, which is totally insane to me. Like, I think 4 sets a week would crush me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I would see progress. I just wonder if there's some, like, middle ground, where, like, if you do... I don't know. It just confuses me. Like if you're just kind of doing a little bit of not too much, you either have to do way too much or the right amount of hardly any or something like that. I don't know.
I mean, look how many people we've trained over the years and like, the things that it takes to make people strong. Like you get those people who are like, holy shit, you've already been working out forever, but we did these few extra things and you're making tons of progress. And you have people who like don't do shit. And you start working out, and it's still hard to make progress with them, even though they're consistent. I mean, there's definitely a lot of...
Yeah.
Whatever that sweet spot is really broad, for sure.
Right.
But, I mean, I would say, like, just for my own training and my obsessive need to juggle all of the things that I've gotten good at and never wanting to lose any of that shit, I've been doing that for a long time, like, before FRC, before the internal strength model. And it's pretty crazy to be able to juggle all those things and like keep making progress on new stuff and things that I've been stuck on and like minimally train. I mean, minimally, minimal for me isn't necessarily minimal for
anybody else.
Your average working out person. But, if I have 3 dedicated strength days that are like 1 to 2 hours, time allowing, 3 days of zone 2, that's pretty minimal to juggle lots of different Olympic weightlifting and strongman and calisthenics things and, random shit that I find interesting physically. Like there's a lot in there.
Skateboarding, shooting arrows.
Yeah, and just
riding a
like
bike.
yeah, and trying to find ways to make progress on all those things is it's cool. It's cool to see that that's possible and not just have to like train like a professional athlete or something. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because when we first started training people, I mean, I was from a completely different background on the whole Pilates thing and then got into CrossFit and then we really tried to, be as like research based and like in the box, in the strength and conditioning box as possible and, do everything with good technique and form and, exercise progressions to make sure that, people weren't hurting themselves. But then this whole new world, a new layer kind of came into it. And it kind of makes you realize that a lot of the research is just it's short-sighted because it's research, like they have to look at things in a lab setting, which always is just a little limiting on a human body because we're so complex, like nutrition research is ridiculous. But in some ways, the same thing with the body. Like you just have to start using at some point your experience and your common sense to sort of question whether or not, not just how the study was designed, but then like what you're seeing, it's meaningful. Like it's definitely meaningful. And it's been awkward for us because there's been a lot of a divergence, away from some of this stuff that was like again, that don't round your back in a deadlift. Well, research says you're going to blow your spine up. And it's like, well, I'm going to blow my spine up, but it's based on like a dead pig spine. So that doesn't make any sense to look at that research.
yeah. Well, at least there's lots of research now that does show that bending your spine isn't as bad as it was once thought, although...
Yeah, bending it too far. Like, that's the thing, is the too far is the common sense. Like, anything that you do too far is going to hurt you. Anything that you do within what you've got should be able to be loaded. Like, it's a human body, it moves, it does all kinds of versatile stuff.
The hard part is that sometimes what you got is so tiny that what you're doing is basic as fuck and it still injures you because,
Right.
like... I used to hurt my back regularly deadlifting with a fucking perfectly neutral spine. So what was that, right? Like I had very limited spine movement and that neutral spine for me was pretty close to the end of what it could do. So that's that's why people say don't round your back, don't push your knees too far over your toes, all these things that we get told because lots of people have been hurt doing that.
Right, because they didn't have tissues that were ready for it. And so all that stuff makes good sense to me now. Like I'm good with that. And now what we're kind of just trying to play around with this ISM is like the volume thing, like what is the optimal volume? And again, that is probably different, like person to person and like how long you've been strength training and like how specific the stuff that you're doing is. And
yeah,
this is our new area of experimentation on ourselves and on our clients.
Yeah. What I'll say about it though is I love not having to do so much volume.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
like even though it still minorly fucks with my ego a little bit, there's always that little voice like, I just do one more set of squats, but it's great. How much time do you want to spend in the gym when you look back on your life? Like maybe doing some less sets is good.
Yeah. Yep. What else? Anything else about progress?
Well,
intensity has to be there.
Yeah.
Make sure you're not working against, too many different things. One other thing that could be going on with an ISM style program anyways. And if you're following our programming, it's kind of generically organized in a way that makes it hard. Like, how do I explain this? So it's basically like the emphasis is generally on this hypertrophy component. It's like we're in here for this hypertrophy. And there's work that we're doing on the capsule and on the rotational stuff. The capsule is usually in more of a maintenance zone because otherwise like we'd be pulling out some of this stuff and then people jumping into the program that maybe don't want to focus on that. It would freak everybody out. So like if you're new to a program, your capsule or new to ISM style training, or even just really doing a lot of general FRC or kin stretch, your capsules and rotational musculature are little baby younglings that have not been exposed to anything. So those things need a lot of attention. You need to understand, like I might be advanced at my strength training, but these tissues specifically have not been targeted and trained in a specific way. And once you start doing that, it's easy to, poop yourself out for one, so that when you do get to the linear tissues that we're so used to training, they feel weaker. because you're not used to having a tired shoulder prior to training that stuff. That could be one issue. And it's good to just keep that in mind. And I think I addressed this in my last video I put out for the actual ISM program. But if you want to take that time, or you need to focus on the capsule and that rotational musculature, you can't expect a lot from the linear stuff. Like, you can only drive something forward so far. And if you're going to pre-fatigue a muscle group or tissues, capsules, you're not going to see a bunch of stuff happening down the road in the session. If you want to see a bunch of stuff happening down the road in the session, don't go bonkers on the deeper tissue stuff, because again, it'll rob from down there. So you have to, again, kind of like shuttle that intensity around to where you want to see it. And if you don't have time and your main focus is on like a capsule or rotation, you don't really need to continue to worry about so much about all this stuff, because again, if it's on maintenance, you really don't need to have that many exposures to maintain. Like, you can do it once in a while.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes back to that thing of picking where the intensity needs to go, which is always hard in the beginning, because you get this workout program and you have, okay, I have all these things I need to do, so you just want to do all of them hard, right? I'm trying to work out and make it hard, but you can't do it all hard, or else you get shitty adaptation. Not enough energy to go around.
Yeah, you just got to spend your money, wisely. Like, where do you want it to go?
Yeah. I mean, that's, I work with some people who are like crazy strong, so much stronger than me. You get a 700-pound deadlift, but if you've never trained your hip capsule before and we start training it, you're not going to be doing it at that 700-pound deadlift intensity. You're going to be doing it something that feels pretty ginger and lame. Like, I'm not fucking doing anything. It might feel hard afterwards. Sometimes they get really sore. But yeah, it's interesting to, it's a perspective shift really about what training is and
right.
what you need.
Yeah, it's tissue adaptations, like, it's all of these are requests for adaptation, whether you're out there running and trying to get a better cardiovascular system and more efficient musculature, or whether you're, trying to get more space in your capsules or longer hamstrings, or whether you're trying to get stronger, hypertrophy, and then which tissues, it's all basically money spent in different directions. And you want to make sure that there's not too much competition, because too much competition with things going in opposite directions is going to diminish the effect and response from either of those things. And that, you're also understanding, like, this stuff that we're doing is all training, it's all intensity, it's all taking energy, it's not prep. Like, that's the other thing that people kind of look at that, because they don't recognize those exercises. So they're like, prep. They're like, oh, that's just a lot of like mobility and a warm up. And it's like, no, it's training. It shouldn't feel like a warm up. It should feel hard,
Yeah, I mean, it is all the same. It's just, the only difference is it's being focused in a very microscopic area versus a whole bunch of stuff. But intensity and training, it's all the same.
Yeah. All right.
Well, on that note, that's probably good. Leave us comments if you want to hear about anything else. Questions, whatever.
Yeah, next month.
Yeah, let's do it. Put it on the calendar.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.